Good morning, everyone. I'm Errol Barnett at the CBS Broadcast Center here in New York. And we begin with breaking news this morning. The Reverend Jesse Jackson has died at the age of 84. He was known for his advocacy and his work on the civil rights movement. CBS News correspondent Michael George reports.
We are against racism.
Jesse Jackson said he dedicated both heart and soul to the fight for justice.
We must put a diploma in one hand, symbolizing knowledge and wisdom, and put a voter registration card in that other hand, symbolizing power and responsibility.
Born in 1941 in South Carolina, Jackson grew up under Jim Crow laws. By the time he'd graduated from college, he was involved in the civil rights movement. In 1965, he joined Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s inner circle, taking on a leadership role. He was with Dr. King in Memphis when he was assassinated a few years later.
High school graduation.
Ordained as a minister, Jackson began Operation Push in Chicago in 1971 and created his political pulpit, pressuring companies to hire more black workers and extend business ties with the African American community. In 1984, he founded the National Rainbow Coalition and launched his first presidential run. The campaign raised his profile, but anti-Jewish comments sparked a scandal that damaged his reputation. After losing a second presidential run in 1988, he kept his spot on the political stage.
We are a humane people. We fight for justice and fairness.
Jackson delivered rousing speeches at Democratic conventions.
Keep hope alive.
And he supported candidates, including his son, Jesse Jackson Jr., who was elected to the U.S. House. In the 1980s and 90s, he helped negotiate the release of American hostages held abroad. And in later years, he protested for victims of police violence, from Ferguson to Chicago to Baton Rouge.
Stop the violence. Save the nation.
In 2017, Jackson revealed he'd been diagnosed with Parkinson's. And while the disease may have slowed him down, he said it wouldn't stop him from his mission, instilling hope in the hopeless. Michael George, CBS News.
Bryan Stevenson joins us now. He's the founder and executive director of the Equal Justice Initiative, a human rights organization. He also knew Reverend Jackson personally. Good morning and welcome. My condolences to you. And first, I just want to get your reaction to the passing of Reverend Jackson this morning.
Well, thank you. I think it's a deep loss for this country. His voice has been so central to the movement toward justice, for this idea of creating an America that includes everyone, that lifts up the neediest, the poorest. And I can't think of anybody over the last half century who's been more consistent in their advocacy for the poor, for people of color. He had a vision of a multicultural, multiracial democracy that welcomed everyone. And I think it's a great loss to the American people.
Give us some insight into how his mind worked. It was his voting rights drive during the 80s that kind of morphed into his own presidential run, with so many people encouraging him to become a Democratic candidate for president. And he continued that push in the decades since, even after failing in that effort. Help us understand how he thought.
He had a brilliant mind. If you spend time with Jesse Jackson, you know he was strategic, he was tactical. He had an intellect that allowed him to evaluate things very honestly, very critically. His activism in the 1960s was always tactical, always strategic. He learned a lot from Dr. King in that way. And after Dr. King's assassination, I think he wanted to continue the focus of the civil rights movement. In the last years of Dr. King's life, he began broadening his work to include economic injustice. It was a poor people's campaign that he was organizing when he was assassinated. And Reverend Jackson really took that to heart. In the 1970s and 80s, he focused on the needs of the poor. And of course, his historic run for the presidency in 1984 and 1988 tried to use political power as a mechanism for broadening economic power for the tens of millions of people in this country who have always been marginalized, always displaced, always disfavored. He tried to undo the work that was done in the first half of the 20th century of keeping poor whites and poor blacks and poor immigrants separate so that they would not come together and form the kind of political power that could radically shift politics in this nation. And I think his campaign, more than any other I can think of, really advanced that. He was an incredible orator. charismatic. His speech at the Democratic Convention in 1988 is, I think, will be remembered as one of the great speeches this country has heard. And as you said, he continued his advocacy into this century despite health challenges. He was a consistent voice for those who are often marginalized, victimized, displaced. And, he came to Montgomery quite a bit. He was an inspiring person. He wanted to lift people up, share his enthusiasm for justice. And I think his incredible legacy is a tactical, strategic mind with a focus on the poor, the neediest, the people who are often dealing with food insecurity and housing crises. He understood the language of those who struggle because he had struggled. And I think he had an uncanny ability to inspire people, to lift people up, to encourage people, to give people hope, which he didn't see as rhetoric. He saw that as necessary for how we get to a better place. And I think that character, that identity is something that has had a huge impact on American life.
I think, Bryan, some people will be waking up to this news and asking themselves the question, how is what Jesse Jackson did in his life, how does it impact people today? We know that many people will boycott products or companies if they take actions they don't disagree with. Your part of the country, Montgomery, of course, was a flashpoint in the civil rights movement, and Dr. Martin Luther King's bus boycotts of the 1960s. But the Reverend Jackson changed and morphed that strategy into something much bigger, much more direct when it came to making Black economic messages to corporations. Help us understand how he did that and how today what people protest when it comes to companies was really developed by Jesse Jackson.
Well, until 1965, the ability to mobilize the Black community in a political space just was very hard because people were disenfranchised. Reverend Jackson understood after the Voting Rights Act, we had an opportunity to create political power in this country that could shape conversations about policy and economics. And that's what he focused on. He was organizing voting rights and voter registration in the 1970s and 1980s. And it was that campaign that inspired the people he was constantly talking to start saying, "Run, Jesse, run." It's what pushed him into those presidential campaigns. But he was the architect of the economic boycott against companies and corporations that resisted civil rights. And there were many. When the Civil Rights Act was passed in 64 and the Voting Rights Act in 65, America didn't just say, okay, we're going to fully embrace this. There was tremendous resistance in political spaces, in corporate spaces, in business spaces, and policy spaces. And Reverend Jackson understood that. And so he created strategies to force these companies and businesses to reckon with the power, the growing power of poor people and Black people and immigrants who were coming into this country. And the boycotts and the economic discourse and the negotiations that he orchestrated in the 70s and 80s were critical to making big business in America more responsive to the needs of the poor and people of color. And of course, we see those strategies continuing across the globe. America now, as a nation, uses these strategies to symbolize and signify its displeasure with foreign powers that are doing things that we think they shouldn't be doing, Russia, China, et cetera. And I think his brilliance at bringing economic forces to advance justice forces, racial justice forces, is another component of his life and legacy that will continue to shape how we think and talk about politics and how we think and talk about power well into the 21st century.
And let's speak about the 21st century and his, somewhat complicated relationship with Barack Obama as he became the nation's first Black president. I can remember back in 2004, I was covering the Democratic National Convention in Boston. Barack Obama had just delivered that kind of stellar keynote speech. And I remember standing outside, waiting to meet up with my crew and seeing the Reverend Jesse Jackson in a private moment, trying to find his people on the phone. And he was trying to tell them where to find him. And he said, I'm in section B, as in by myself. It was an interesting kind of very Jesse Jackson-esque phrase, even if in his most private moments. But how did he view the ascension of Barack Obama, and how did he lay the groundwork for it?
Well, I think he was very excited by the Obama candidacy. I mean, he was clearly committed to the ideas that the Democratic Party was trying to advance. He wanted a multicultural, multiracial America. And he saw that the party as advancing that more than any others. And he wanted anyone who could succeed with that, from Bill Clinton to Barack Obama, to make that move forward. Of course, generational leadership is always challenging, and I think, he came from a time born in Jim Crow segregation where it was a different path, a different pattern. He was doing sit-ins. He was participating in protests as a teenager and a young adult. And that's just a different political tradition than the tradition that others coming along like Barack Obama had to emulate. But I think he was very excited by that candidacy. And, he wanted to inspire more political leadership from all kinds of people. And I think he was very generous about that. He wasn't perfect, and he would be the first to tell you. I think his famous line, "I'm not perfect, God's not finished with me yet," represents his own understanding of how change is often difficult to navigate. But at least in my experience, he was always encouraging, always affirming, always pushing younger people to do what could be done, his own children in politics, people like me. He would come to Montgomery, and even when he was in a wheelchair and had difficulty speaking, if I was giving a talk somewhere, he would sit in the front and he would put his hands up and he would hold a heart. And just to kind of communicate non-verbally that he loved what we were trying to do, loved what we were trying to say. When we put out our literature about lynching, he would take all of these materials and just send them everywhere. His compassion toward others, I think, made it impossible for him to begrudge the success of anyone who was going to voice concerns that helped the poor and the needy. And that's what took him across the globe to help soldiers. He didn't know to get involved in conflicts that weren't his priority, but became his priority when he felt like he could make a difference to help people get their freedom, like those soldiers. And so I think change is always difficult, but I think he was very excited by what we've seen in this century with the Obama campaign. And I think very concerned about what we're seeing now with this retreat from our commitment to civil rights. I think it broke his heart to hear some of the things that we're hearing. This effort at erasure, I know, weighed on him heavily, and he wanted to do more, and he wouldn't stop even when he had to get around in a wheelchair.
A towering figure in American political life, more than 6 decades of public service. Bryan Stevenson, wonderful to get your insight and your personal take as we react to this news. We appreciate you joining us.
Thank you.
We want to get you now live to Chicago. You're looking at CBS News Chicago reporter Darius Johnson. He's outside the Rainbow Push Coalition headquarters. This is a human and civil rights organization that Jesse Jackson founded and is still going today. Good morning to you, Darius. This news just breaking in the past just few hours. What is the reaction there? And tell us about how the coalition continues.
Hi there, Errol. Good morning to you. Yes, right now, as you mentioned, we're standing outside the Rainbow Push Coalition, an organization that was founded by the Reverend Jesse Jackson Sr., and an organization that continues to impact and reach out to the community here in Chicago and even far beyond. Still to this day now, while many people know this place as a place that has really represented movement for decades now, it's quickly becoming a place of remembrance and reflection and mourning as many people wake up to learn about this tragic death of the Reverend Jesse Jackson. Now, this world is not just mourning a civil rights leader, but it is marking the loss of a moral voice that continued to push this country to live up to its promise. I just heard you talking to someone there about the impact and the relationship and also the importance and really how he supported former President Barack Obama during his presidential campaign and during his tenure, his 2 terms as president. Just to really speak to where the Rainbow Push Coalition is here in the city of Chicago, the Obama's home is just blocks away from here, walking distance. Minister Louis Farrakhan's home is just blocks away from here, walking distance as well. So it just speaks to exactly all of the power and all the influence that sits right here in this one particular neighborhood here in the city of Chicago, and how the Rainbow Push Coalition has continued continuously been a bedrock for many African Americans who have really pushed towards success, who have also pushed Americans, other Americans, to remember that there is hope and to also continue to live up to its promise.
It's a great point, Darius. And as you were mentioning that, just looking at reaction from people like the Reverend Al Sharpton, also a well-known figure here in the U.S., he says that Jesse Jackson was a mentor of his. And I just want to read a portion of the Reverend Sharpton's statement, quote, "He was a consequential and transformative leader who changed this nation and the world." Reverend Al Sharpton goes on to say he shaped public policy and changed laws. He kept the dream alive and taught young children from broken homes like me that we don't have broken spirits. Talk to us about any expected memorial events. I don't think anything specific has been announced yet, but many things may be happening there in Chicago since the Reverend spent more than 60 years of his life there. But help us understand how Jesse Jackson left an imprint on the city where you are.
Yes, Errol, they are still honestly figuring out this morning what those public observances will look like. But as you just mentioned, he called the city of Chicago home for many decades after being born in Greenville, South Carolina. And they say that those services will be held here in the city of Chicago, and the Rainbow Push Coalition will be announcing that date. All of this, again, happening at about 1 a.m. New York time, 12 a.m. Chicago time, and many of us just receiving that release early this morning, just hours ago. So many people are really just waking up to all of this right now. You talk about the impact here on the city of Chicago. Over the last couple of years, he really faced some serious health challenges, including Parkinson's disease and a rare neurological disorder that really started to take a toll on his health and his speech. But even throughout that time, he still showed up in many places, whether that was to inspire young children, inspire the next generation of attorneys and lawyers right here in the city of Chicago, and to continue to speak out on injustice while mentoring new leaders and urging the country to continue to move forward. One thing he continuously did until his last breath was continue to instill hope in African Americans and all people across America, not only just here in Chicago. And I think we've seen that just recently. He was at the installation of the Cook County Bar Association here in the city of Chicago. Every year around Christmas, he would join Cardinal Blaise Supich in a memorial service and in a praise and worship ceremony at the Cook County Jail, where he would inspire so many inmates that there is hope. There is life outside of these bars. There's life after incarceration. And those words, those moments really spoke to many. Even growing up here in the city of Chicago myself, I went to high school just blocks away from the Rainbow Push Coalition. During that time, more than a decade ago, he showed up to speak to high school students. Even as big as he is, as big as he was, his importance, he made sure that he continued to mentor young people and also continued to recite those words, his message that was rooted in dignity. I am somebody. I may be poor, but I am somebody. Errol, back to you.
Darius Johnson reporting from Chicago outside the Rainbow Push Coalition headquarters. Darius, great to chat with you and have you share your personal insight into the passing of the Reverend Jesse Jackson. 6:16 in the morning where you are. Thank you, Darius.